Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today's course is designed for current and future permit holders, directors, administrators, leaders, and managers. And it's also for both child care homes and child care centers. Okay, so the goal for today's training is to ensure that you understand the basics of running, operating your child care on a day-to-day basis according to the minimum standards. Okay, this course is minimum standards based. So the root of the course is minimum standards. My suggestion to you would be to download a copy of the minimum standards for your type of operation so that you have a copy on your computer to refer to at all times. Some choose to print out a copy of their designated minimum standards to have a hard copy in front of them. Just be aware that minimum standards are updated and they change on a routine. So if you're printing out all 200 plus pages, know that you may have to amend that booklet and reprint out pages to suffice the changes that may occur over the years. Okay. Again, welcome and thank you for joining. All right, so let's jump right into the minimum standards. I would like to start off today by talking about what your rights and entitlements are as a permit holder or as a leader in childcare. Okay, as a leader who has a childcare or is in that position at a childcare center or home. So at the front of your minimum standards book, it tells you what those rights and entitlements are. Okay. You have a right to request a waiver or a variance if you feel that you're unable to comply with the standards as written in front of you. Okay. Licensing has a right to approve or deny that waiver or variance, but it is your right to request it. For example, if you have a director who you would like to hire in that position, and that director does not meet all of the qualifications to be a director, you may request a variance, which means you want to hire a person and vary from complying with the standards. So you want to make your own variance to the law and hire somebody who doesn't quite meet the standard. Okay. So let's say they're missing a year of experience. You submit your variance, you submit all of their paperwork and everything that's required to designate them as the director, and you also submit the variance application. Okay. And you have a plan in place. So no, my director is currently short 1 year, of experience. However, we would like to request a variance for 1 year for my director to meet those qualifications. We will put in place a mentee from another facility who is also a director to routinely come to the facility at least twice a week to come and help the director with whatever they may need. Okay, so that's how you submit a variance. Not only do you tell them what your plan is, who you plan to put in place, or what variance you plan to apply for, but you also give them what you'll do, what your plans are to ensure that this person that you have in place will it'll be a good choice, right? You have a plan. You don't just have a problem, but you also have a plan or a solution. Okay, so that's one option. Under this section, it also talks about administrative reviews. This is a big thing. So whenever childcare licensing or CCR, which the initials now are childcare regulatory, whenever they cite the facility for something and they say that you were out of compliance with a certain standard, you have a right to request an administrative review. Okay. I've noticed when I work with my clients that sometimes owners or leaders hesitate to request a review in fear of rubbing the licensing inspector wrong, or in fear of retaliation, or in fear of them being tougher or harder on you because you disagree with them. I would like you to remove that from your thought process, okay? And think about it like this. You are human, so are the child care licensing inspectors, okay? Sometimes they make mistakes. And I know that for a fact because when I was a licensing inspector for 8 years, there were some standards that I cited that were incorrect. Some of them got overturned and some of them didn't. But I understood that sometimes I made mistakes with my deficiencies, okay? And being corrected is a lesson. So don't think of it as a negative thing to request a review if you disagree with a deficiency, okay? Sometimes, and a lot of times, they could be overturned, which means that you wouldn't have that deficiency on your record, okay? So make sure if you disagree with a standard, if you disagree with a citation, even if you don't voice that at the moment, right? You still have an opportunity and you still have a right to request an administrative review. Now, if you choose to request an administrative review, just know that there's a time period in which you may do so. The rule is that you have 15 days from the deficiency to request a review. So whenever it's cited, whether the deficiency is cited while they're there doing the inspection or the investigation, or whether the deficiency is cited when they're away and they send you something in the email or in the mail that says that you're deficient in an area, you may request a review, right, in hopes that it gets overturned. The way the administrative review process works is that not only does the licensing inspector who gave the citation review it, but the approval or the review comes from their supervisor or someone in a higher level than them. So it's not that same person who gave you the deficiency who will decide whether or not the deficiency should stand or if it should be overturned. It gets looked at by a whole set of new eyes. Okay. So build your confidence with that. And if you disagree, then say something. And sometimes if you disagree right when the incident is happening or when the deficiency is happening, you may be able to avoid the citation and altogether, and you may not even have to do a review if you notice something. One of the examples that I recently saw was that a center was cited for an outlet not being covered. Okay. Upon further review, while the inspector was still at the child care, someone noticed that when they built the building, the outlets have the built-in covers. When you look through the outlet holes, you see the white covering, which means that that's a built-in cover. Either one of those covers are sufficient, right? Either you have the plastic plug-in cover that you put in, or you can have the built-in cover. Either one is in compliance. And what they discovered is that they don't have to put the outlet covers in those outlets, and that the center should be cited for that. So look, that was a quick and easy way to avoid the deficiency. Okay. All right. Also, appeals. You have a right to request an appeal on a decision that's made by licensing if it relates to like applications, or if they deny or revoke your permit or suspend your permit, or even, for example, if there is a citation of neglectful supervision or abuse or neglect where it's cited specifically for an individual or for the center, you have a right to request an appeal on those decisions. Okay, they're not set in stone. You have a right to request an appeal, and you will get an opportunity to go before the State Office of Administrative Hearings, which is called SOA, to have a judge overlook that finding to see if your appeal can be if your appeal works and that deficiency can be overturned. So not only do you need to know this, but also your staff need to know this. Okay, when you're cited for abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a child, those things stick on the record. And if that citation stands, just know that whomever it's been cited for that as the individual, they will have to change their career because they will not be able to work in childcare. Okay, will directly affect them in the future. So if you disagree with a finding of neglectful supervision, or if you disagree with child care licensing, denying your application or revoking your permit or suspending or any of those things, you have a right to request an appeal. All right, so keep that in mind. I just wanted to give you some background. I run into a lot of people who have issues or are not confident about this area. Tell them if you disagree. Ask them what you can do about disagreeing, so that the licensing can lead you down the right path so that you can make sure that your voice is heard. Okay. So the first section that we're going to cover in the standards is the subsection or subchapter entitled personnel. Okay. And that's the same for daycare centers and daycare homes. It's called personnel. All right. So the person who is in charge at the child care is either going to be the primary caregiver or the director. Okay. Both all child care operations needs to have a person in charge. Okay. So just make sure that there's somebody designated in charge. When the director is not available, the director goes out to lunch. The director goes on vacation for 5 days. There has to be someone designated in charge of the facility, right? Until the director returns, until the primary caregiver returns. And that person must also know specific things about the child care operation in order to be left in charge. Okay, so what are your responsibilities as the person in charge, i.e. primary caregiver or the director? Okay. All right, so you have to be sure that the daily operations of the facility is run in compliance with the standards. Okay, you have to make sure that all of your caregivers or employees follow the rules of the standards. So what does that mean? That means they need to know what the standards are. Okay, you need to go over standards with them. You need to send them to classes where they get opportunities to get trained over the standards. Okay, because they're responsible for knowing what they are and what they are required to comply with. Okay. I mean, you have to make sure you supervise anyone in your child care. Make sure they're supervised. Supervision is very, very important. Not only is supervision important for children, supervision is also important for any staff or any assistant or anyone else caring for children that's under your responsibility, under your watch. Okay. So that means routinely checking on them, co-teaching with them sometimes, maybe even using your cameras to watch them sometimes, or going in the classroom and doing purposeful full observation, sitting there for 30 minutes with your notepad and do purposeful observations to take notes and see how they're doing and knowing what they're up to in the classroom. Make sure they're fulfilling their assignments and that they are aware of what their responsibilities are and that they can fulfill them. Okay. Direct care is really important. You need to make sure that your staff don't work more than 10 hours, don't have more than 10 hours of direct care in a classroom. Everybody needs a break. 10 hours in a classroom is a lot, okay? So make sure they're not working more than 10 hours in a classroom over a 24 period time, whether it's a home or a center. Everybody needs a break, okay? All right, so now let's talk about what constitutes experience in a licensed child care center, licensed home or registered home. So let's start with the child care center, okay? The following types of experience can be counted, okay? If you were a director, if you were assistant director, if you were a caregiver working directly in a with children in a Department of Family and Protective Services licensed or certified child care center, that will constitute as the experience for directorship in a licensed center. Okay, so let's talk about what counts as experience in a licensed or registered home. If you had experience as a director, that counts as experience in a licensed home. Okay. Also, only the experience working directly with children in the Department of Family and Protective Services licensed or registered child care home can be used as experience. Okay, so that experience can be an assistant caregiver, a substitute caregiver, a primary caregiver. Any of those can constitute as experience in a license for a child care home. The key is that the experience has to come from a DFPS license or certified child care center, or a DFPS license or registered child care home. Okay. And the work must be in a full-time capacity. So what they're looking for is for full-time, it's like at least 30 hours a week, right? And it doesn't matter if the experience is paid or unpaid. All right. So also, a lot of times we run into the situation to where someone may not have experience as a child care center provider, but they may have experience as a public school teacher or as a substitute school teacher, right? So what the standard says is 1 year full-time experience teaching in a public or private accredited school in grades pre-K through third grade throughout the customary school year can count as experience as well. Okay, substitute or part-time classroom teaching in public and private accredited schools may also count. Okay, if the total of time adds up to 1 year of full-time teaching, during the customary year. So you may be a substitute teacher, but some substitute teachers work every day, every day. They have maybe full-time positions that are, or long-term, I guess, positions that are for subs. So that may be the case. But if you worked once a week for a year, then that doesn't give you your 30 hours per week. So you have to make sure that the capacity in which you work, and if you want to, especially if you want to use it towards experience, is full-time, which is defined as 30 hours or more. Okay. Also, 1 year postgraduate study in child development and early childhood education or a closely related field can help substitute for the experience to work as a director. Okay. So in order to determine that, I just suggest every time when someone submits an application or they're questioning whether or not their qualifications are enough, submit it to your licensing inspector. If you have someone that you have in mind to become a second director at your licensed home, or to become a second director at your licensed center, or a new director at either place, just send the information to child care licensing. What they do is they have their checklists, they have their charts that they use and that they compare the information to, both in experience and in education. And they go down the checklist to make sure that you meet the qualifications, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have to tell you yes or no. Okay, yes or no. They're the ones who have to give you that. All right. There are also specifics in child development and daycare center management or daycare center home management that you have to have experience in. So there's training, you have to have certain trainings in order to be the director or renew your directorship, right? At a daycare center or a daycare home. So just make sure you guys are doing that, okay, for those qualifications. All right, and next we're going to start talking about what the professional development is. Like, what training hours do staff have to have in order to meet the annual training requirement? What training staff have to have in order to start working there? There's orientation, there's pre-service, there's annual training, and there's additional training that staff have to have depending on what services you offer at your childcare. Okay, so we're going to get into that next. Another thing to consider, or something that you may have to deal with, is if someone receives their education or their experience from a country outside of the US. So the way that works is licensing allows you to accept that information, right? As long as you provide the supporting documents to show that what you get from them is equivalent to what they're required to have in the US. For example, if they have a high school diploma from Cuba, right? You have to ensure that whatever education they received in Cuba to get the high school diploma is equivalent to the information they receive in the US to get the high school diploma. So how do you do that? You'll have to find an agency that not only translates their diploma to English, but also translates the equivalency, right? To show that, okay, this is equivalent, or this exceeds American standards, to ensure that it will be approved by childcare licensing. And childcare licensing needs those, that documentation showing equivalency, okay, before they can accept that as someone who, if you want to use that for experience or just to be a caregiver, then you put that information in their file. If you want to use that as their experience or their education to be a director, then you have to send that information to childcare licensing to ensure that they meet those qualifications, okay? When you send information to licensing, best practices are to send your originals, but licensing will not keep originals. They will send them back to you, okay? They will send originals back to you, okay, along with the certificates, to the original certificate, to show that the caregiver or the person has qualified as a director, and now they have a certificate to show it, okay? All right, so I want to make sure I touched on that before I got into the part about your staff training. Staff training can be tricky, but it does not have to be, okay? I suggest that when you want your staff to get certain topics of training, because they have to get certain topics for training, that you vet out trainers and you see which trainers you like, which trainers you don't like. You see which trainers offer the training that meets what you implement at your daycare center, and use them. If you find a trainer that does not support or does not offer the same types of service that you do, or you're not in agreement of how they tell or how they train staff on giving service at a childcare center, then you don't use them. Vet them out, find the good ones, and make sure you use those and send your employees to them. Childcare operations have different methods in which they get staff trained. Sometimes they will have a list, give it to their staff, and say, you have to receive this many hours in this subject matter, and that many hours in that subject matter. Here's the list. You know what you need. You have to get these trainings done by this date and have them back to me so that we can be in compliance with standards and have them in your personnel file. Okay. So if you do it that way, it's fine. You know, there's no rule about how you have to do it, but just please vet out the trainers and make sure that the staff are getting the training. And if you question the training, if they say they receive, go take the training, right? Go take the training and see. And in all situations, no matter whether it's a home or a childcare, train your own staff as well. Train them over the rules, go in, observe, teach them what they're supposed to do on a day-to-day, because the person who is training your staff is not there with them every day, right? To ensure that they're implementing, to ensure that they understand what they were trained upon. So you have to make sure that if once they have taken the training, let's say they go and take infant activities training over the weekend, okay? Go into the classroom and watch how they implement it. Ensure that they're implementing it. So, okay, show me some things that you learned in your class that you took over the weekend, and watch them show you them. That's a good way to ensure that they did participate in the training and that they were learning in the training. It defeats the purpose, and it's a waste time and money to take training classes that you don't pay attention to and that you do not implement in your day-to-day services. Okay. The point of taking training is to implement them. Also, some childcare centers I know also will, or instead of having the staff take the training, they set up trainings, whether they have someone like myself come out to their facility on Saturdays, maybe, you know, a few times a year, to give them training as a bulk, as a group, so to ensure that they receive the same training and they receive the training. So you, whether you pay for it or not, you set the training up to where someone does it for your entire group at the same time. Okay, that tends to work for a lot of people if it's possible. I know centers run into the weekend issues. We're open every Monday through Friday, or even Monday through Saturday for some cases. So it doesn't work for my center to have to take a day and have someone come out to do a training. So you have to allow them to get it on their own. But either option works. Okay, either option works. Just make sure that the training is getting done. Make sure that the certificates are real, make sure they include all of the required information that's supposed to be on them, which we will get into shortly. All right, now let's talk about professional development. Okay, so professional development is the training or education that the staff have to have, right? Or sometimes it's well, also the director of the primary caregiver have to have staff development as well. Okay, so one thing that has to be covered in staff development is orientation. So whether no matter across the board, all childcare operations, there has to be orientation. Okay, orientation includes a lot of things. Okay, an overview of the standards, review of your operational policy, the discipline, how to release children, your policies and your procedures. Okay, they have to get the SIDS, shaken baby syndrome, early brain trauma, development training if you care for children under the age of 24 months, right? 24 months and under. So you have to get that training. As a director, you have to get that training because you offer those services, and any teacher who works with those children have to also have that training. Okay, so that's a requirement. Now, generally for me, I usually suggest that if you offer services to children 24 months and younger, every teacher gets SIDS, shaken baby, early brain trauma training. And that is because and safe sleep practices. That is because you never know when someone has to sit in the room, substitute, or cover for lunches, or if someone calls in and you have to pull somebody in the classroom unexpectedly, or someone goes home sick. I think that everyone should have that training. Okay, so and that kind of covers you, and then they have their training that they need for the year. All right. An overview of preventing, recognizing, and reporting the maltreatment of children, which is the abuse and neglect. So they have to do that. Everyone has to do that annually. Okay, upon hire and annually, they have to have that training. Okay, for also pre-service training is a requirement. Okay, pre-service training is a requirement. Oh wait, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let me go back to orientation. So also orientation must include an overview of how to handle emergencies. So you want to make sure that your staff know what to do if an emergency were to arise. Okay. So how to handle emergencies. If you administer medication, they have to know the rules on administering medication. They have to know where your fire extinguishers are, where your first aid equipment is. They have to know that. Okay, food allergies, that's a big thing. So they have to know if a child in your care has a food allergy. Okay, I think that everyone in the child care should know if there's a child who has a food allergy, and they should know that, because you never know who is going to be paying attention to see a child when they are in distress, or if they start having symptoms because they were exposed to those allergies. Okay. Physical facilities, make sure that they know the safety of the building, where to go, what to do if there's a hazard, electrical hazard, any kind of hazard, what to do and how to do it. Okay. And then for transporting, if your center or your home transport children, you have to have transportation safety training. So transportation safety training is for if you transport. So if you do not transport, then you don't have to take that training. However, if you transport, or you're the director of a facility that offers transportation, you have to have transportation training every single year as well. Okay. All right. So remember that. So the two trainings that you have to have based on the services that you provide are the transportation safety, and your SIDS, shaken baby, early brain trauma training. You have to have it. It's a requirement. Okay. Also, first aid and CPR training with pediatrics, for pediatrics and adults is required for everyone. Is required for everyone. So just make sure that everyone has that training, and make sure that it doesn't expire. Okay. Some facilities will have it set up to where they use one person for first aid CPR training, and that person comes to them. They schedule a day on a weeknight, a weekend, to where that person comes out and conducts the training. You can do that. I think that's great to have everybody on the same track as it relates to the training, but you don't have to. Okay. You can have staff go out and get their own training. Okay. So that is the orientation. Now, let's talk about pre-service training. Okay. The standard says that pre-service training is required for, oh wait, I lost my spot. For all caregivers. Okay. We know that caregivers are the people that are counting the ratio, who are left alone with children to supervise them. So they are caregivers. So even if their title is not a caregiver, but they're in the role of a caregiver, they have to have pre-service training. For daycare centers, pre-service training has to cover stages of child development, age appropriate activities, discipline and guidance, self-esteem, supervision and safety practices, positive interaction, prevention and control of communicable diseases. There are a list of things that has to be in your pre-service training, and it has to be in your pre-service training for all your staff. So generally, most centers will, or most childcare facilities will have a packet that they use. In their packet, they go through it and make sure it includes everything that's required according to the standards, and then they go over it. Okay, they go over what they have the staff do the packet on their own, and then they go over it with the staff to ensure that they know what they're supposed to do and they understand what is required at the center. Some child care facilities may choose to use someone else to do their pre-service training, which is completely fine as long as the staff member receives the pre-service training. However, I suggest for my clients that you do pre-service training because no one else can set up a new staff member into your home or into your daycare center better than you. Okay, but you know what you need, you know what you want them to have, you know all those things. So if you train them before they start, if you do orientation, if you do pre-service training, then you know that they are coming in with the knowledge that they need to be successful at your childcare. Okay. All right, so orientation. Now we talked about that. We talked about pre-service training. All right, so we talked about the first aid and CPR with rescue breathing and choking and pediatric CPR training, which is required by for the primary caregiver and all other staff, director and all other staff. Okay. We talked about the pre-service training, which is required for childcare centers and what needs to be covered in that. All right, so let's keep going talking about pre-service training, which is for childcare centers. In some cases, some staff may be exempt from receiving the pre-service training. Okay, if a caregiver has at least 2 years of prior experience in a regulated childcare center, or if they have documentation of 24 clock hours of training, then they're not required to have pre-service training. Okay, however, I wouldn't base someone else's success in my childcare center on training that they've received from an outside place, especially for pre-service. Pre-service, I want to make sure I introduce them the right way into the practices at my facility. Okay, introduce them the right way into the practices at your facility. Yes, they may have the pre-service training, but I would still suggest that no matter who it is and what kind of experience they have, if they're coming into your childcare center new for the first time, that you give them 8 hours of pre-service training. 8 hours of pre-service training, regardless, over what your practices are at your childcare facility to make to make sure they're acclimated into your program to be the most effective. Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about training, annual training, which is required. So let's and who to get trained from and how to pick training. So now let's talk about what topics or what kinds of training is required. So for a registered childcare home, the requirement is 15 clock hours of annual training for each substitute caregiver, assistant caregiver that's in a registered childcare home. And that's within every 12 months. So every annual period, they have to have 15 clock hours. 24 clock hours of annual training are required for each substitute or assistant caregiver in a licensed home every 12 months per the anniversary. And 30 clock hours are required for the primary caregiver in the same time period within every 12-month period. Okay, so that's the requirement for childcare homes. So childcare centers for caregivers, you're required to have 24 clock hours. Caregivers are required to have 24 clock hours annually. every year, 24 clock hours, and directors are required to have 30 clock hours. So let's talk about what clock hours are required for childcare caregivers. Okay, and I'm gonna try to go between both sets, both homes and centers, because generally it's the same information, it's the same topics in which the training has to cover. Okay, so childhood growth and development, discipline and guidance, age appropriate curriculum, teachers, teacher-child interactions. We talked about the abuse neglect that has to be covered annually, as well as I talked about it in orientation. If care is provided for children 24 months and under, you have to get that training every single year. Okay, every year you have to get that same training because you continuously care for that age group, and you have to be trained over that age group. Okay, all right. For the next set of hours, there's no set amount of hours that you have to get in these topics, but you do have to receive training in these topics. Okay, emergency preparedness, preventing and controlling the spread of communicable diseases, administering medication if you offer it, preventing the spread of food allergies. Well, you have to do it whether you have children with food allergies or not, because you don't know if those children will enroll, okay, and you haven't received that training. Okay, knowing the physical building and premises, handling and storing hazardous materials. Okay, all that's required in your annual training. Okay, and then the remaining hours of training, not specified with how many, but you at least need to have one topic, one or more topics, one or more trainings in these topics. So child and children with special needs, child health, safety, okay, risk management, identification of ill children, cultural diversity, understanding different cultures within the children that you care for, professional development, okay, like how to communicate effectively with parents and things like that. And then age appropriate activities, make sure you cover that. And then minimum standards, of course, which is the topics that we're covering today, right? So we're talking about minimum standards. Okay, as far as the amount of hours you may get, remember, no more than 80% of your annual training hours can come from self-instructional, i.e. a training like this. So no more than 80% of your annual hours, and that number changes depending on your capacity at the facility. No more than 80 hours can be self-instructional. So keep that in mind as you sign up, as you take courses, and keep that in mind as your staff take courses. Make sure they're not doing more than that allowed 80% of self-instructional training. Okay. Now, your annual training does not include your orientation, pre-service, first aid CPR, transportation training. It does not include those trainings. So if you offer, let's say, transportation, your staff have to have 25, 26, I think it's 2 hours of transportation. So 26 hours, okay, of training because they transport children. So they need the additional hours. So keep that in mind. Okay. All right. So those are the topics that your staff have to have. And caregivers directors pretty much have to have the same topics, except the directors have to have topics related to management. Okay. Which is really important because you constantly get trained over how to be a leader, how to be a manager. So that's important that you receive specific hours based on that. Okay. So for homes, the primary caregiver of a home must have at least 6 annual training hours in management techniques, leadership, or staff supervision. Okay. And for a child care center, they must have at least 6 clock hours of annual training in management techniques, leadership, and staff supervision as well. Okay. There's more than 5 years of experience. The primary caregiver must have at least 3 hours of annual training in the same topics. And for daycare centers, if they have 5 or more years of experience, same thing, 3 clock hours in management techniques, leadership, or staff management. Okay. And then after that, make sure that you select training hours to complete your 30 clock hours in specific topics related to what you offer at your child care center. Okay. All right. Again, child care licensing does not regulate or authorize or endorse trainers. Okay. However, they do have the Texas Trainer Registry where you can go out and look up trainers who are listed there. I'm listed there. My co-trainer, Ms. Lakeisha Namani, was listed there. So you'll find trainers listed there. So if you're sending your staff out to get training on their own, be sure to give them that list or give them the link so they know where to go to make sure that they can find training that has been approved by child care licensing. With the first aid and CPR training, the standard now says that the training may be a combination of blended learning, which utilizes online technologies like self-instructional training options. So it can be blended. So a lot of times training with CPR and first aid is done a portion online, and then a portion is done face-to-face with experience with training. If it's a training on an online platform, but it's live with the person live talking to you, not like this one, but like with the person live talking to you, interacting with you, that's considered face-to-face. And that can be done with CPR and first aid training as well. Okay. But it also can include a different technique, like the training that you're taking right now, in addition to or included with the other training, the other format. So it has to be a combination of training, which includes self-instructional, but it also needs some kind of face-to-face interaction to ensure that you understand and know what to do for first aid. And then if you have any questions, you can interact directly with the trainer. And that's with all trainings, okay? With all trainings. The online sources are considered face-to-face as long as it's a live training interaction and it's not like a pre-recorded call. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the criteria to be a trainer, or the criteria that you have to look for to ensure that the training that you receive and staff receive will be approved by child care licensing. Okay, the first thing that I said is that they have to be listed on the Texas Trainer Registry. So that's one thing, listed on Texas Trainer Registry, or they can be an instructor who teaches early child development, okay, or a relevant course in a secondary school, like, or an institution for higher education, like in college, they teach it. An employee of a state agency, like child care licensing, for example. Some nurses do first aid CPR training, right, because they're experienced in that. A physician or psychologist, there's expertise in their area. Social worker, nurses, again, they have certain expertise, so they can offer training. A person who holds a general recognized credential, like the CDA, they can host trainings, okay? Because it shows that they've received training over certain topics, so they can in turn give training over those topics. Okay? A primary caregiver can give training, a director can give training. Now, here's the stipulation. If there have been administrative penalties placed on your child care home or your child care center, you cannot train your staff. Okay. If your center is on probation or corrective action, you cannot train your staff. Okay. So administrative penalties, probation with child care licensing, or corrective action with child care licensing, you cannot train your staff, your own staff. Okay. A person who has at least 2 years of experience working in child development may train the staff, like a Head Start or a Head Start program may train their staff if they have a current CDA or an associate's degree in child development. Okay. All right. So I wanted to break that down to make sure you knew how to get the approval for training, to make sure that the people that you select to train meet the criteria. Okay. Now let's move on to general responsibilities. So these general responsibilities are for caregivers. This is for Household members, this is for anyone who you hire to come in, whether they're paid or unpaid, anyone who is in the caregiver, supervisor of children role, okay? Even volunteers, even if they're not counted in ratio, okay? Or even household members who don't care for the children, okay? On a routine basis. Here's what the standard says. Everyone must demonstrate competency, good judgment, and self-control in the presence of children, okay? You must relate to the children with courtesy and respect. You must recognize there's any kind of special uniqueness they may have, okay? Do not abuse, neglect, or exploit children. And then ensure that no child is abused, neglected, or exploited. And then release children only to the person that they're supposed to be released to. So that's part of your policies, your operational policies. Your general responsibilities are to do that as well. And then report any suspicions of abuse or neglect. Okay. You must know and comply with the minimum standards, know each child's name, and have information with each child's name, their date of birth, and their other important information. You must also comply with the supervision standard. Make sure you supervise children at all times. Ensure that the children are not out of control. Like when children are out of control, that's when things happen. Children are jumping off of couches and bookshelves, then they're injured. So you want to make sure that there's a control. You have control of the children in the classroom or in the home. You must be free of any other active duties that are not directly related to childcare, okay? Like administrative or clerical duties, okay? Meal prep. And I know that gets tricky in homes. So in daycare homes, you have to make sure that when you are preparing meals for them, which you have to do, that you have the children in a safe place, you know, to where they won't injure each other or injure themselves or get into anything that can cause them any harm. Okay, no personal use of electronic devices. You must also interact with children in a positive manner. Okay, so there's several responsibilities, general responsibilities, right? These are the basics, again, basic minimum standards. So anything that you do to increase or improve the standards, do that, okay? So what does the standards mean when they say supervise children at all times? This means that whoever is assigned to that group of children, right, can account for each child, okay, which includes the whatever activity they're doing, where they are, that they can have appropriate visual and or auditory awareness. That means you can hear them and you could see them. You can hear them or you could see them. You know, there are times when you won't see everybody at every time, but can you at all times, but can you hear them? Did you hear when a child screamed ouch, right? Did you hear that to go over and intervene to see what was going on? Okay. Please take into special consideration the ages of the children, their individual differences and abilities, the layout of the home, or the layout of the room, and then neighborhood circumstances. So take all those things into consideration when you think about the risk of supervision or not adequately supervising children. Okay. All right. So as far as personnel goes, professional development, supervision, general responsibilities, that concludes that section of the standards of the training. I apologize. Okay. So just make sure that you are following these standards adequately. Okay. Children are dependent upon your training and that you hire people who have the appropriate training. They're dependent that you have people in place who can keep them healthy and safe while they're in childcare. So when you're hiring staff and you're asking questions and you're trying to see whether they'll be a good fit, not only pay attention during the interview and ask the right questions, but when they start, you should be with them, supervising them, observing them do the things that they said that they know how to do, right? The first couple of weeks should be a trial basis. Within that first couple of weeks, you should be able to see whether or not the teacher has potential to do the things that they talked about during the interview, or if there's potential for you to help them become better. Okay. It does not matter whether the staff member had previous experience or not. The experience that you give them at your child care can make a difference. Okay, so make sure you're really hands-on at the beginning. Don't just because someone says they're a public school teacher and they have a daycare, they had a daycare in the past or something like that, just let them loose in the classroom, because they still may not know the standards, and they still may do things wrong in the classroom, or they just may not be a good fit for you and your operation. Okay, so keep that in mind when you have staff. There should be a lot of observations. There should be ongoing supervision of staff to make sure they're adequately supervising children. Okay, so staff, personnel, hiring, keeping staff. I know it's hard right now. So when you get some that you want to hold on to, make sure that you are giving them the best support possible. Make sure you're training them adequately. Make sure that if they need help, you give them help. If they struggle during diaper changing and controlling the other children, make sure you schedule the diaper changing to where you can go in the classroom or have an assistant go in the classroom to help them during that time, because you want them to stay, right? So you want to make sure you're a support to them. Okay. And if staff are struggling to be the kind of caregiver that you would like in your facility, train them harder, train them longer. And if it doesn't work over a certain period of time, then you just cut your ties and say, well, hey, this isn't a good fit for you. Okay. So that was all about personal development, staff development. Okay. When hiring new staff, it is really important that you already have items prepared for them that they need. Make sure that you have their folders ready so that you can fill out or have them fill out all of the appropriate documentation that they'll need so that when they start, they are in compliance. This is with your records. So there's a personnel form that's on the child care licensing website, and other forms that are needed in the personnel file, like their training logs. Make sure you include those in the packet, and make sure before you have an employee start that they complete all those forms, including background checks. Make sure those background checks are done and fingerprints are done for those that require fingerprints, and make sure that you put a copy in the file. Okay. Now let's talk about files. So the standard allows for both or either electronic or hard copy files. So if you choose to do electronic filing, just make sure that licensing has access to those files, and whomever else is required to have access to those files have access. For example, it serves no purpose for the director to have, or the facility to have, electronic files, and when the director is out for a bus run, or when the director is out on vacation, the person in charge can't access the files. So that person can't access the files to see who are the appropriate pickup people, who kids should be, so the kids are released to the proper people. They can't access the file to call mom because a child has a fever. So if you are using electronic records, just be sure that whomever is supposed to have access to them can gain access. If they cannot, it will be you are out of compliance with the standards, and it could be a deficiency if licensing sees it. Okay. Okay, so have all that stuff ready and prepared. I would just have a few copies available so that as you're hiring staff, you have them fill out that paperwork, affidavits, and don't let them start, because affidavits are important as well. Don't let them start unless they have the required documentation. Okay. Use child care licensing forms, best rule of thumb. If not, take those forms and compare them to yours. Okay. Now, your job descriptions and job duties. Be sure that they're detailed and that staff are signing off on those job duties and job descriptions. Okay. Also make sure that your staff have a copy of the operational policy, whether electronic or a hard copy. Okay. Operational policies, let's talk about those. Licensing has a list of things that are supposed to be included in your operational policy. You must make sure that you have a completed operational policy for licensing to review, for your parents to have a copy of, and for your staff. Okay, everyone must have a copy, whether electronic or hard copy, of the operational policy. It covers you, and it ensures that they do what they're supposed to. It even goes into details about expelling children from care. If you have your policy in writing, and it says that if a child hits a teacher, they receive 3 days suspension. If they hit a teacher twice, then they can no longer be in care. They're not a good fit for the operation. Then uphold that. Okay. Give the parents the warning. Show them in the policy where it states that this is your practice, and make sure that you enforce it. A lot of times I'll see that staff don't feel supported because parents are allowed to behave how they want at the operation. Parents can come and go. Parents can send their children when they are sick. Parents can send their children when they misbehave, when they hit teachers, when they hit other students. Have a strict policy on that. Enforce it. Okay. It'll help across the board. Okay. Also, good practices. If you know that you're short staffed, which everyone is right now, right? Adjustments should be made to your facility. That means that you close an hour early because you know that you are short staffed at the end of the day, right? If that means that you need to change your days of operation, you don't have anybody that wants to come on Saturday. No one, everybody calls in on Saturday, right? Then maybe your operation shouldn't be open on Saturdays. You have to adjust to the shortage. For example, another example, if you have 3 teachers call in, or 1 teacher can make the difference, right? Then as children are coming, you have to determine whether or not you have to have a cutoff on the amount of children that you can receive that day, or on the latest that a child can come. Okay. Now, if you have that call in and you start accepting children, then you just have to tell people at the door, we're at the capacity. We had teachers call in. We cannot accept any more children, and do not accept the children if it's going to put you over ratio. Okay. So keep that in mind. Make those adjustments. Make those adjustments and be prepared to make those adjustments. There's substitute agencies that I know. I have clients that use those as you need them. But from my understanding, with the current way that childcare is, you can't call a sub the same day and have them come in. So they're not as resourceful as it relates to that. Okay. While you're hiring during this season, continuously hire, so that you'll always have someone with their current updated information on Indeed or whatever platform you use, so that you know you've recently interviewed them and you were interested in them, but you just didn't have the space. Now you have the space and you want them to start. So stay in contact with them. Okay, stay in contact with potential hires and hire people often and have them come in. Again, you never know how long someone will last in your childcare, or you never know, even long-term staff who've been there for a while may leave. Okay, so always have extras, always have extra. Furthermore, you never want to be in the position to where you keep staff around just as seat fillers. Okay. Having staff there just because you need to have them, even though they aren't any good. I mean, for lack of a better term, they aren't worth anything, right? They're not adequately supervising the children. They're not following proper diaper changing procedures. They come in when they want to come in. They leave when they want to leave. They call out sick for 2 or 3 days in a row, and don't call in and don't show. Then they just show up one day. And out of desperation, you welcome them with open arms. That is a setup for your facility to fail. The thing is, you don't want staff to run your operation or to run the climate of your operation, and you don't want parents to run the climate of your operation, right? Everybody should be the rule follower, and you set the tone as the director. If or primary caregiver, if you don't follow the rules, or if you try to get around the rules, or if you only follow certain rules when licensing is there, but when they're not there, you don't do it, then that sets the tone for your childcare. Be strict on yourself, then in turn, be strict on your staff. Okay. All right, now it's time for you to do the work and to test your knowledge. Okay. What I would like for you to do is, in an email, send me an email stating what the job general responsibilities are for childcare providers, whether you are a childcare home or a childcare center. There's a section in the standards that says general responsibilities, and I want you to email me a list of what the general responsibilities are. Furthermore, I want you to review your operational policy and compare it to the operational policy in the administrative section of the standards to ensure that it is complete. Once you have checked to verify that it is complete, you will email me a copy of your operational policy, and I will then check to ensure that it is complete. At the end, once I'm done checking to ensure that they are complete, I will email you your certificate, and you will have a completed operational policy so that you know the next time licensing comes that your operational policy is complete. One less thing to worry about. Okay. Also, in that same email that you're going to send me, the operational policy and the general responsibilities of caregivers, I want you to answer the following questions. Okay. What clock hours are required for a director who has more than 5 years of experience? And what or how many clock hours are required for a director who has less than 5 years of experience? Also, I want you to list what is an approved certificate. What must be included on a certificate for it to meet minimum standards requirements? As leaders, as managers, you have to know these things, right? So you're going to go ahead and do the legwork, do the paperwork, get it over to me. And when you email me the information, I will then in turn check it to ensure that it is correct. And I will send you over your certificate for the remaining leadership and management hours. Okay. Talk to you guys soon.